Welcome back, everyone, to mtg-world.com's sealed tournament of the century. At the start of this event, 8 players and collectors gathered together to open 8 factory sealed alpha starters, as well as 3 legends boosters apiece, from which they constructed their decks. Adam and David have valiantly fought their way through the rest of the field to be here in the finals, where they'll duke it out for all the glory. Adam's playing his green, red, and black deck, which includes the Black Lotus he opened at the start of this event. David's playing a black, red, and blue deck. It's very removal heavy and features one of the absolute best creatures in the format, Singer Vampire. As always, I'm joined by my co-caster Adam, and without further ado, let's get right to it. We're picking up the action after one round of shuffling and mulligans. Adam kept his 7-card hand, while David is going down to 6. David likes his 6, so he gives Adam a thumbs up and the go-ahead to start the game. Adam plays a forest and passes. David responds with a quick swamp and nothing else. And again, just a land from Adam. He does have ramp in this deck, including Llanowar Elves and a Wild Growth, as well as the aforementioned Black Lotus. Doesn't look like he's lucky enough to have any of them in his hand right now, though.
A Nettling Imp, so this is a 1/1 that can tap to force a creature to attack.
And even though it has wings, it does not fly. Unlike almost every other creature in David's deck.
So it looks like I did not draw my 4th land, even though I started out with 3 lands in hand.
That's magic, folks.
Alright, so he swings in with a Nettling Imp.
Though just a 1/1, that Nettling Imp can lead to some very uncomfortable combat situations. It's probably worth leveling a Lightning Bolt at if Adam has something like that in his hand.
So the Nettling Imp gets berserked, but it dies at the end of combat.
And Adam goes to 18 as a result of that odd little bit of unintentional green removal from Alpha.
Well, that imp can be quite annoying later on if used correctly, so I think this is the correct play here. So we have a Phantasmal Forces. This is a 4/1 flyer, but it has an upkeep of 1 mana. Down comes a Rod of Ruin.
That'll deal with that Phantasmal Forces nicely.
Not before it deals 4 damage, though.
Adam goes to 14.
If that land would have come 1 turn earlier, it would be pretty devastating.
Oh, definitely. You could have killed the Nettling Imp without using Berserk, or killed the Phantasmal Forces before it got a chance to attack. Now, you wouldn't have been able to develop your own board while spending that mana on Rod of Ruin, but it is one of the best tools available for winning long games of attrition. David swings in again, and the inevitable happens.
Down comes the Singer Vampire. Now, this is a lot harder to deal with Rod of Ruin. Unless David decides to bloodlust it, as he contemplated in a previous match.
Now, Adam does have a Chain Lightning in his deck, so the Singer Vampire could be dealt with if he draws very well. But he's definitely on a clock, and a quick one at that.
Especially with that Disintegrate.
Adam can't do anything about that Singer Vampire, and he's already down to 10.
And here comes a Fallen Angel. Looks like David's holding Pyrotechnics and Disintegrate.
Ooh, that is a lot of burn. It's going to be hard to get out of this one.
Missing one land drop will do that, but I guess the Singer Vampire will do that as well.
Yeah, and I believe by now you've actually missed several land drops. And I don't believe the card Adam just drew is a 5th land, unfortunately. That's a Paralyze that you drew for the turn?
Yep, but with no black mana.
And David would have enough mana to pay the upkeep anyways. Hill Giant rumbles in.
Gets David down to 17.
Adam's still going through the motions, but this is pretty grim.
War Mammoth. Three trample.
And if you're playing Flavor Draft, you could always argue that they're so big they can block flying creatures.
So here are my only chances if he sacks both the Singer Vampire and the Falling Angel to itself, huh?
Somehow David walked the tightrope and avoided that line.
And that's game 1. I'm fairly certain he could do that and still win the game with the Pyrotechnics and followed with a Disintegrate the next turn.
Now that I would have liked to see. That was pretty quick and brutal. Let's see if Adam can put up more of a fight in game 2.
So it looks like here I'm actually sideboarding in 2 plains and Swords to Plowshares. And I believe that most of David's creatures are black. Or, I mean, he does have a few blue creatures, but the ones that I can't deal with are black. And so I'm actually siding out Terror from my deck.
It's reasonable. It's, going 4 colors is a high variance play, but you kind of need to get lucky to be able to deal with creatures like Singer Vampire. David also contemplating a sideboard plan, perhaps?
I also considered dropping both black and white and going with a couple of Remove Souls from my sideboard and going into blue, but I thought that it would be risky because Remove Soul wouldn't be an answer for Singer Vampire and Falling Angel later on if they're already in play.
Alright, the players deal out their 7-card hands. David has a couple lands. I imagine he's going to keep this.
And he has a Pestilence. Seems like a strong card.
His deck actually seems insanely strong. A Pestilence, a Control Magic, a Singer Vampire.
Yeah, I believe
a couple pieces of premium removal.
And he has Pirate Ship, which is both a beater and removal. I believe we counted after the match, and he had something like 12 pieces of removal. Coupled with big flyers and just big creatures in general.
You definitely have your work cut out for you here. But all things considered, a turn 1 Llanowar Elves is a great start.
Oh, the Elves survives.
Well, that had to have been a pleasant surprise. Let's see if you can press your early mana advantage. David goes down to 19. Unfortunately, Adam couldn't take advantage of that extra mana.
Alright, here comes a Nettling Imp.
Thankfully, both players hitting all their land drops so far.
Here's the answer for the Nettling Imp.
Now, this time the Rod of Ruin is out much earlier than it was in the previous game. Maybe, just maybe, you'll be able to use that to your advantage. Nettling Imp swings in for 1, taking Adam to 19 as well. Adam plays his 4th land. He now has access to 5 mana, which is a pretty key point for his deck. Cards like the Boars, Moss Monsters, Tree Folk.
Yeah, I had 2 Boars, 2 Moss Monster, and a Tree Folk in the deck. So I went ahead and killed the Nettling Imp and it got in for 1.
David's down to 18 now. And at the moment, David's got nothing but lands in play, a little bit different from the previous game, to say the least. There's a weakness. -2/-1 is enough to send those elves to the graveyard.
Fireball just came in.
Well, that's pretty nice. At least now you have an answer to Singer Vampire.
And we've got an Urborg. And a Moss Monster. I have a feeling this is about to eat a chair. And there it is.
And David's hitting all his land drops, but this time he doesn't have a Singer Vampire to cast with it. He is still holding on to that Pestilence, however.
Now we have a Dirkwood Boars.
But no blue mana for David to Spellblast it.
We have a Pestilence.
Now you can only spend black mana on Pestilence, the ability at least.
So it looks like he won't have enough mana to kill the Boars until the next turn.
Not to mention a giant growth on your end could complicate things. Though at this point that's probably something David just can't afford to play around. Adam swings with the Boars, taking David down to 14. Pestilence deals damage to players too, so David will be taking quite a lot of damage if he wants to deal with those Boars. But at this point I don't really see what option he has. Well, a 0/6 wall actually helps out quite a bit. One damage from the Rod of Ruin, taking David to 13. Adam's probably a little reticent to play more creatures in the face of that Pestilence. Adam swings with the Boars, and now David has a lot of options, but unless he's prepared to take this hit, he probably wants to put the wall in the way and wait for Adam's second main to see if he plays another creature into the Pestilence, before deciding whether he wants to pull the trigger or wait another turn.
So he does block with the wall, and I chain lightning the wall post combat, waiting for this opportunity where he only has 1 red mana open, so he can't bounce it back.
That's a pretty great top deck. Looks like a Solkanar the Swamp King.
The problem is that he can't play it right now because it would get finished off by the Rod of Ruin if he elects to kill the Boars. Alright, so he takes 1 more damage, going down to 12.
Adam draws for his turn and plays a swamp. I imagine he's going to attack before he does anything else. Adam reaches for the boars, but David puts the brakes on for just a second and says he hasn't passed priority yet.
So before combat, David kills the Darkwood boars. So each player takes 4.
Brings David down to 8 and Adam down to 15. Adam most likely wanting to pass here without playing another creature to ensure that that pestilence will die.
So here comes a Black Lotus.
Heyo.
Gets sacrificed for red.
Hey, no channel, but 2/3 of the combo ain't bad. I've been waiting all tournament for you to do that. 8 to the face, and game 2 is in the books. Both players seem happy with their 7-card hands. No elves, no wild growth for Adam. Somewhat of a slow start. David, on the other hand, got that blue mana he was lacking last game. And with the mountain he just drew and the swamp he just played, he'll have access to all 3 of his colors very quickly. Nothing to play at 3 mana.
Seems like quite the tempo format.
David also plays a land and quickly passes. Oh, and there's the 4th color.
David probably wondering what's going on here.
Another land and another quick pass from David. He has a lot of reactive cards in his hand right now. That's Adam's 5th land.
So here's the Darkwood boars.
One of the many 5-mana creatures in Adam's deck. Well, this seems to be going pretty well, except for the fact that we can see David has a control magic in his hand.
And he decides to remove soul.
Devastating. If I'm not mistaken, David just drew a Phantasmal Forces, which he can definitely play now that he's not holding mana up for Remove Soul anymore. Then again, 1 toughness isn't so great against Rod of Ruin.
Looks like a lesser werewolf. I'll let you take a stab at what this does.
I think this one's been explained too many times already. But it's a 2/4 for 4 that can temporarily weaken itself to permanently weaken another creature. Of course, it took about 8 paragraphs of opaque rules text to put all that on a card, but that's the gist of it.
Quite the design masterpiece, I would say.
Card designs were definitely a little more raw back in the day. Not that they don't still print completely impenetrable cards like Search the City and Midnight Oil.
I think David's looking up at the camera, just making sure that I wasn't sneaking copies of Darkwood Wars into my deck.
Now, the werewolf can only use that ability, giving itself -1/-0 to put a -0/-1 counter on another creature, if it's blocking or being blocked by that creature, I believe.
And you can't use it to reduce its own power to below 0.
I mean, it doesn't even really seem like a werewolf type effect to me. If anything, it should be a vampire. Really struggling to understand the flavor behind Lesser Werewolf. David's got both Solkanar the Swamp King and Mind Control in his hand, and he can cast either of them. And they're both good answers for Dirkwood Boars.
Looks like he's going with the Sokanar.
That's a 5/5, and whenever a player casts a black spell, he gets to gain 1 life.
And it has Swamp Walk, which is one of my colors. But luckily, I sided out 2 swamps during after the first game.
Let's hope you don't need them.
I do believe I still have 1 or 2 left in the deck.
So those 4/4 boars and the Rod of Ruin can hold the Solkanar back as long as Adam has the mana to activate the Rod of Ruin.
So this is the part where not drawing a land really hurts. Looks like I have a giant growth in hand. Here's an attack. Probably a bad one.
But David does not block, going down to 16.
So down comes the Moss Monster.
3/6 does a pretty good job of blocking a 5/5. There is still that control magic to consider, however. If David takes the Moss Monster, he'd be able to swing for 7 and still have a blocker for the boars on the crack back.
So he uses control magic, takes the Moss Monster. Pretty broken card in this format, I would say.
That's definitely an effect you don't get for 4 mana anymore these days.
Alright. He swings in for 7, I would assume, since I'm tapped out.
I believe David asked Adam how many cards he had. It looks like he has 4. Not sure what he's thinking about here. Maybe he's worried about giant growth plus berserk plus removing the blocker. David sends in the whole team. Adam goes down to 13. Looks like Adam's looking at that land there. I believe it's a Hammerheim. It taps for red mana and it can remove the Landwalk ability from a creature.
I believe I also cited in a Mountain Walk, burrowing, which gives my creatures Mountain Walk. So that's actually quite a useful card for him to
It's
have.
unfortunate you didn't know he had that Hammerheim. And unfortunate that he drew it.
So looks like we have a Living Wall here, which is a 0/6 for 4, and it regenerates for 1 mana.
And it looks disgusting for free. David untaps and considers his options. It looks like he's got a land, a pestilence, a spellblast, and one other card I can't quite identify in his hand. David still doesn't have any great attacks here. Both the Solkanar and the werewolf could be killed.
Well, he has the Moss Monster as well. And the Sokanar can't be killed because the Rod of Ruin can't be activated for 3 mana.
That's very true. You do, however, have enough mana for Giant Growth, which I'm sure David by now knows is in your deck. Maybe that's why he's taking so long to decide whether or not he wants to attack.
So it looks like he's swinging in with the 2 fatties, a 5/5 and a 3/6.
It's an interesting decision here, since it seems like Adam has 2 safe blocks, so you've got to be suspicious of some combat tricks here.
So I make a pretty bad misplay here. I actually left open a green because I had a Giant Growth in my hand, and I figured I would just Giant Growth my boars and kill the Moss Monster, but I just completely space here and forget to do it. And then afterwards he plays a weakness on the boars, and I figure it's maybe not worth it to save him anymore.
Yeah, whereas before you would have been trading your Giant Growth for that 3/6 in effect, now the only thing it would get you is a 2/3 on your side of the board, which is much less valuable. I think if you were planning on using the Giant Growth the whole time, maybe you should have blocked the Solkanar with the boars. That does play into your opponent having terror or some other form of removal. But on the other hand, sometimes you just have to go for a high value play and hope that your opponent doesn't have the counter. Of course, with the benefit of hindsight and being able to see David's hand, we know that that plan would have backfired spectacularly, as he's holding actual counter magic. There's an Ironroot Treefolk from Adam. Not too bad, that can safely block everything but Solkanar. And that weakness did cause David to gain 1 life off of the Solkanar, the Swamp King.
Yeah, so this board would look quite different if the Giant Growth was used on that Dirkwood boars.
Yeah, maybe. And if not, at least you would have gotten a Spell Blast out of David's hand, which it looks like he's considering using right now.
So we're looking at a Spell Blast. So I guess that does not resolve. So that's an X and blue, and it counters a spell with converted mana cost X.
David swings in with the team. Adam takes 5, going to
down
8. So if you'd used that Giant Growth, and David indeed spell blasted it, he would not have been able to counter Ironroot Treefolk. That would have given you another blocker for the Moss Monster, putting you on a much slower clock, which definitely could have made a difference. Anyway, David's played a Phantasmal Forces and a Lost Soul.
So we've got a 2/1 Swamp Walk with a 4/1 flyer with an upkeep of 1.
David goes up to 18 off the Lost Soul.
No, actually he missed that trigger.
Fair enough. It's not a May ability, but of course, as of rules changes from several years ago, if David doesn't notice, Adam's under no obligation to tell him that he needs to gain life.
So I'm in quite the bad position here because of that Giant Growth misplay. He's basically overwhelming the board.
And he didn't even need a Singer Vampire and a Fallen Angel to do it. Not that Sulcanar the Swamp King is all that different. He's an evasive fatty that's immune to terror. It looks like Adam might be eyeing that Chain Lightning in his hand. So the Lost Soul eats a Chain Lightning.
And passes back. David untaps. Draws. Forgets his upkeep. Phantasmal Forces dies. But I think it did what it needed to do. Basically tie up my mana.
Yep, it's a small blessing, but probably not enough to change the course of the game.
So that's 5 coming through.
Adam's down to 3.
And we got a Pestilence.
Well, I don't think there's much you can do about that.
He does have 3 black available next turn.
The only way Adam could get rid of that Pestilence before it has a chance to kill him is if he can somehow get rid of all of the creatures on the board.
Seems like an easy task, right?
Not sure how he can do that with only 1 white mana.
Well, 1 more white mana and a Wrath of God should do it.
But it looks like there won't be any divine intervention this game. Adam extends the hand, and David wins the tournament. Congratulations to David, and to everyone that participated. Remember, if you like this sort of content, don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment. Thanks for watching, everyone.